everyone, welcome. We're here today for dementia discussions brought to you by the Alzheimer's Association. My name is Christine Bunnell, and I am the Regional Manager for Greater Boston and Northeastern Mass at the Alzheimer's Association, Massachusetts and New Hampshire chapter. We are a national organization and have a chapter here that covers Massachusetts and New Hampshire. And I'm here with my colleague Lisa. We're really excited to talk with you all today to start bringing this conversation out into the community about Alzheimer's disease, a number of different topics to follow. But we're really excited today to lay some foundation about what the disease is, what some of the common myths or questions that we get in the community, and really hope that we'll get some questions and feedback from all of you to inform what we bring next onto our show.
Hi, Christine.
Hi, Lisa.
It's so great to be here with you today. My name is Lisa Sobian, and I am the Director of Dementia Services and Life Enrichment Programs at Duville Life and Wellness Community in Lowell. And I'm also a volunteer with the Alzheimer's Association. And Christine and I met a couple years back. We were actually doing a gig on local radio for our upcoming Walk to End Alzheimer's. And I've been a volunteer for her ever since. Mm-hmm. And we chat a lot about different things for different questions that people have about Alzheimer's disease. We find when we're in the community, a lot of people have questions that they're just not sure where to get the answers. They're looking for resources. And at one point we were chatting and thinking, wouldn't it be great to have so many other people be able to join us in these chats? Mm. And so that's how we kind of came to be here. Yeah. We wanted to invite people in for our conversations and hopefully answer some questions. And as Christine said, we'd love to have people get in touch with us for questions that you do have that we can answer.
Great. Yeah, we're excited to be here. So Lisa, I think one of the ways I thought would be helpful to start today is just to think about what are some of the most commonly asked questions that we get in the community related to the disease and see if we can answer them today, talk about them today. Like you said, bring this conversation to other people. What would you say is the most common question that you get out in the community or in the work that you do with families?
Sure. Yeah. So I think the most common question I get repeatedly is, what's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? Is there a difference? Yep. You know, is dementia the beginning of Alzheimer's and all of those things?
Yeah, me too. I think it's like we'll talk about a little more, but they're related, but they're not quite the same thing. So I'm curious, when you're in a program in the community or working with a family, how do you explain that difference to people?
So what I usually like to tell people is that dementia itself is a medical term that describes the problems you're having or seeing in somebody. Problems with language and memory and reasoning and judgment and all of those things that would make someone concerned. Yeah. But it isn't an actual diagnosis of a disease. You need a disease that's causing it. So dementia is almost like an umbrella term.
Sure.
You have the umbrella with all of the different symptoms under there, and then you have the different diseases that cause it. And Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia and accounts for about 60 to 80% of all forms of dementia. So I like to tell people, I usually ask my audience, I say, so after I've explained that, if I say to you, I have dementia, does that definitely mean I have Alzheimer's disease? And inevitably,
no.
Right, exactly. But if I say I have Alzheimer's disease, do I definitely have a form of dementia?
The answer is yes, right? Am I correct?
Okay, good. Great. So that kind of helps people to put that in perspective. And there are other forms of dementia.
Sure.
So I think it's really important for people to know that distinction. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think the point that you made too about Alzheimer's disease accounting for 60 to 80% of cases of dementia is important, because I think that's why we hear the terms used so interchangeably as well. Sometimes someone might be living with Alzheimer's disease and might feel more comfortable saying dementia, or perhaps living with those symptoms that you described and not sure what the disease is that's causing it.
Absolutely.
And so the description of dementia is used as sort of that in the interim of finding out what is the disease that's causing it, or perhaps they're not able to determine what the specific cause is, and so
and that does happen sometimes when they're just not sure.
Yeah, or if someone's not able to go through the more thorough diagnostic evaluation process, I think using that term to describe the symptoms that someone's experiencing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. And I think also with with it, we know that people can have more than one form of dementia.
That's a good point too. Yep.
So
yeah, and I think another piece that we find really important at the Alzheimer's Association is also just getting out there and sharing this difference between Alzheimer's disease and dementia, and some of the things that we'll talk about today with the warning signs and other considerations to take into keep in mind, because we also know that a lot of people that are living with Alzheimer's disease or another disease that causes dementia don't have a diagnosis. So they're not going through that diagnostic evaluation process, or perhaps those symptoms aren't being addressed or brought to the doctor or assessed more thoroughly. And so getting out there and recognizing if you're seeing changes that are impacting someone's memory, their thinking, and it's impacting your daily life, it's really important.
And that's the key, impacting your daily life.
Yeah, impacting your daily life is like that tipping point for dementia.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I think that's the most common one that we get, and I think a really helpful visual that will show up on the screen that I think can help show this and really illustrates what Lisa was just saying about it being an umbrella term will show up here next, so that's a helpful way, I think, to visualize what we're saying or what we're describing when we say an umbrella term with diseases that cause dementia to happen. So I hope that visual is a helpful way to illustrate what we were just talking about dementia being that umbrella term that describes a number of symptoms, and then there's a number of diseases, Alzheimer's disease being one that can cause dementia to happen. So I think that's the most common question that I get in the community. I think another one that's sort of a question or a myth, I would say, kind of falls into both, that when I'm out in the community or talking with families is Alzheimer's disease a normal part of aging? Yes. Or that it's normal to have a touch of dementia or to experience a little bit of dementia in later life. And so I think that's one of the, I would say maybe second, or another common question or myth that I get when I'm out and about, and I think is an important one to talk about, because what we do know is that Alzheimer's disease, other forms of dementia too, are these disease processes that are happening in the brain. And the brain does age just like our body does, but when you're experiencing dementia or any of these other forms of dementia, it's not a normal part of aging.
No, and I think that's talking about the fact that our bodies age and so do our brains right along with it. And I like to think of it sometimes like a car. So, you have your car and it's still functioning, but you might have to replace a part.
Sure.
Right? So people get knee replacements and they get, shoulder replacements, or, they might have to get some new teeth and things like that, but we can't replace our brains.
Sure.
I mean, we tried that on Young Frankenstein, that
didn't
movie,
work
that
out
didn't
well.
work out so well. So unfortunately, we've got a lot of neurological things that happen, I think. But we still know that it's not the normal way we're supposed to age. Our brain is not supposed to get these diseases, and I think that's the salient point, that it's a disease function.
Sure.
And so I do hear that a lot, and I have to say, the more people are getting education, the less I'm hearing that people think it's on automatic.
Sure, sure.
But it's still something I think that's really important to clear up, that myth that you're not automatically going to get this disease if you live to a certain point. However, age is the largest risk factor.
Right, right. And that's the other piece we're talking about before. Alzheimer's disease and dementia, they're related. Age and Alzheimer's disease are related, but it's not deterministic. That if you reach a certain age, you will get Alzheimer's. But to your point, we do know that advanced age is the greatest risk factor for developing the disease. About 1 in 10 people over 65, and then that increases as our age increases as well.
Absolutely, but it's still not the norm, even though, I mean, I think it depends on which statistic you read, but by over 85, it's about 47 or 51%, it depends on the statistic, but still it's not the norm.
Correct.
To do that. So you're not destined to do that, and brain health is so important, which I think would be a great thing to talk about on another episode, because people are really asking about
Definitely. And I think that is such a good point that you made. There's not this deterministic piece. It might increase your risk, but what does that look like to help minimize some of risks? And I think that's a great thing that we could talk about another time. The research that's related to lifestyle and other factors that can help mitigate those risks.
I think that one thing that sometimes I get asked in my talks, and I'm sure you do too, that is related to this, is in terms of, is there a genetic test to be able to test if someone's going to have it? And it's an interesting thing, because certainly the more people you have in your family, if you have more than one relative that has it, your risk increases. However, it's still not deterministic, and there are certain genes that are contributory for risk, but again, they're not deterministic.
Right.
So if you carry those genes in what they call late onset Alzheimer's, which is after 65 typically, it's just going to increase your risk, but it doesn't mean you're definitely going to get it. Whereas with early onset Alzheimer's disease, which is a whole different baseball game, there is a gene that is linked to that. So that's potentially another talk for another day also.
Yeah, no, those are very good points, Lisa. Yeah, and I think about that a lot in the community too. I think especially now, I don't know if you've ever, have you done a 23andMe or any of those genetic tests?
No, I have not. I have a cousin who did it, and I'm kind of linked onto that seeing my relatives.
Yeah,
but yeah.
And some of those, I mean, it's so cool, the technology that we have now and this information that we can gather, and yet I do in the community talk with folks about considering how you interpret that information, being really mindful of talking to your doctor or a genetic counselor about some of those results, because some of them do have what you were talking about, those risk genes on the panel. And the challenge is you could have that gene and develop Alzheimer's disease, or have the gene and not.
Never. Yep.
And you could also not have that risk gene and go on to develop Alzheimer's disease.
Absolutely.
So it's confusing. It can be confusing to figure out, what does this really mean? And then the other point that you made about those deterministic genes that are very rare, it accounts for less than 1% of cases, meaning if you have the gene, you will develop the disease.
I think there's like about 450, 500 families that carry that.
Yeah,
in the
it's
United States.
It's a very small percentage, and typically involved in research or because it's very pervasive in their families. It's a good point.
Absolutely.
And yet, with more information that we have, understanding what your risk factors are, might you have a gene? Are there other factors like increased age, history of head injury?
Sure.
Incidence of increased cardiovascular disease.
Absolutely.
Might those things make you be thinking more concretely about, or more motivating you to take part in some healthy lifestyle and other factors that might help lessen your risk? So,
Absolutely.
yeah, I think as we're talking, it's making me realize that healthy living and
really
research-oriented piece would be a great, follow-up.
Absolutely.
And I think leading into when we're talking about the myths, I think one of the things that's so important at the Alzheimer's Association, a big piece of the work that you do, Lisa, in the community, is educating people about what some of the warning signs are of Alzheimer's disease. And we have a program for that you have certainly coming up. But I think one of the things that we really like to talk about are those 10 warning signs. And what are some ways that people can be educated and informed about some things, their symptoms or challenges that might indicate that something is changing, might be related to Alzheimer's disease, another form of dementia. So that's a big piece of what we do. And I think a great thing, we'll show this visual that just lists out here the 10 warning signs for Alzheimer's disease. And then Lisa and I will talk a little bit more about them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so you can see from these 10 warning signs, it covers a lot of different ground here. We're not just talking about memory loss. And I think that that's commonly or more of a leading or predominant symptom that we know related with Alzheimer's disease, but it does affect the whole brain.
It does.
And other forms of dementia impact other parts of the brain more significantly initially. And so there's a lot of different changes. This isn't just memory that we're talking about.
And I think that's a myth that people think that, memory loss is related to that. And I think, there's some changes also that happen that are normal as we age. We talked about some of the things that happen in our body, but we do have some changes as we age. It might be that we take a little bit longer to remember somebody's name, or don't do more than one thing as well as we used to. I always ask people, have you ever been sitting in your living room watching TV, and then you kind of walk into the kitchen and you're like, oh my God, why?
What did I come in here for?
Right? And what do you do when that happens?
Yeah, well, that's such a great question. I mean, it happens regularly for me, but I think it's one of those things where you. I have that ability in that moment maybe to retrace my steps. Maybe I go back to the couch and I sit and
walk
backwards. Walk backwards.
I don't recommend that. You don't want to fall. But I tend to sometimes, I'm walking backwards.
Totally retrace your steps.
But our brain does it on its own. And we don't have to sit down and say, okay. I mean, sometimes you're trying to really figure something out. But it comes back to us. And that's because our brain is healthy and functioning the way it should. And, you've lost your car temporarily in a parking lot. And then you can find it. And those are normal things. And people sometimes worry because we hear so much about memory loss being an issue that people now are hyper-focused on, oh no, I forgot this, what does that mean? And I think that, there are some of these normal things, and sometimes it's trying to do too many things at once, not getting enough sleep, being really stressed out, can really affect our recall. I know when I'm tired, I will have kind of some word finding issues. I can't put my finger on that.
Definitely.
And so when we talk about things that are, this kind of leads right into the 10 warning signs, because one of the warning signs is memory issues that disrupt your daily life.
Yeah.
So when I can't remember, the actor's name that I saw in the movie the other night, it's not affecting my daily life, and I will kind of recall that later.
Have that aha moment.
That aha moment.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's at 3 a.m. Now with social media, I could just post it and say I remembered and not wake anybody up. But that is those memory things where you're unable to really depend on yourself anymore for remembering. It is normal as we get older to need more notes and reminders.
Yeah.
And I know when I'm walking down the hall and somebody tells me something, if I don't write it down, I will tend to maybe forget it by the time I get to my office. As I'm older than you, so you might not be at that point
it happens.
yet.
No, I think the points that you make about sort of normalizing that some of these warning signs may be due to lack of sleep, inattention, due to a lot of competing priorities or other things that are going on. But I think what you're getting at, and I totally agree with as well, is what's that tipping point? And that can be really different individual to individual in terms of what the tipping point is that it's impacting your daily life.
Absolutely.
And I think one of the great examples, I think one of the places, or one of the things that I think we hear about a lot, but I like an explanation for, is misplacing things. So we talked about going to the room and maybe like, why did I come here? But the losing your keys, right? So where did I put my keys? Did I put them on the counter? I can't find them. I have that experience often in the morning trying to rush out the door. And I think just like what we talked about when you leave the room, maybe your ability to retrace your steps. Okay, you know what, last night I came in this other door.
Visualize it, right?
Yeah, so I changed my coat, so maybe they're in that other pocket. But what we find is that sometimes if someone's experiencing something that's maybe tipping over, where you might want to look at that warning sign as something that might be indicative of Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia, is you find the keys in a really obscure or strange place.
Or you're not sure what to do with them.
Or what to do with them. And I think sometimes if you find your keys in the refrigerator or in a cabinet, it might be that you're putting the groceries away, right? And they fell in there.
Right.
It might also mean that you're losing the ability to recognize what the keys are for, and therefore putting them in the wrong place as a result.
And perhaps blaming somebody else. If you put your
suspicious
groceries
thinking
away and your keys have fallen in there and you open the refrigerator, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe this. That having that insight of, I can't believe I did this, as opposed to someone else must have, stolen my keys.
Right, because they're not where I put them.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for people to understand too that memory loss can also be so many other things. People are sometimes afraid to go to the doctor because they're afraid someone's going to say it's Alzheimer's, but there are so many other things that can cause memory disruptions that you want to take care of also. So, trying not to be so afraid of going out and finding that.
Yeah, and figuring it out. And I think one of the other warning signs that I think is less commonly known is also having trouble with visual and spatial relationships. I think about that in a lot of different ways, but a great example from someone from one of our early stage programs had shared with a colleague of mine was that he started to notice a change when he was having difficulty with his driving route home from work. Worked in downtown Boston, in and out every day, drove in and out every day. And I know for myself, when I go into Boston, I have my GPS ready. I might be checking with my husband or maybe my dad about what the traffic pattern looks like. I'm armed with a lot of resources and compensatory strategies to help get my way home, because it's not a familiar route to me. But for this gentleman, this was like the back of his hand going home. And when he had to take pause in that garage to say, where do I go? Where do I go next? I might needed to maybe call his partner or needed to call on the use of a GPS system. That was different for him.
Sure, and it wasn't a momentary, wait a minute,
quick lapse, right? He really was losing that a bit, lost his ability to kind of map his way home with those other managing and interpreting that visual and spatial relationship and the planning it takes to get home and do a complicated task like driving. And so I thought it was such a great example that he shared, because it gets at this less commonly thought of challenge or warning sign, and also this really important piece of individual differences. So for him, that was very different and a cause for a disruption in his daily life. Whereas for me, if that was me in the parking garage, I needed all those tools. That was the normal for me. So I think that's where this can be challenging
and also
too.
being able to use those tools. You can someone could put you down in a new environment, and you can pull up your GPS. I mean, I always joke with people because I used to have this amazing sense of direction. And now I've depended so much on technology that I don't think it's as good as it used to be. But I can figure it out, and it's almost, I heard somewhere, and I don't remember where, but it's almost like when you have dementia, it's like you've lost your GPS in terms of just everyday life.
Yeah.
And I tell people, think about if you're in an environment where you're totally new.
Yep.
And you don't have access to an old-fashioned map. You don't have any cell phone service, and your GPS goes off.
Yep.
And that feeling of, I don't know where I am.
Or what to do next.
Or what to do next,
Yeah.
because I'm just completely lost.
Definitely.
And that kind of is that similar. But with driving, I think we take for granted how many different things have to happen in our brain. It's
Definitely.
not just the muscle memory of putting the car in gear and putting your foot on one of the pedals and driving. It's those visual, spatial. It's the making sure you kind of turning and you're looking where you are, and there's not if there's traffic, if something happens suddenly, being able to react to it.
Yeah, those are great points. Yeah, and I think that's the piece where, again, we're just really hopeful with this, the 10 warning signs that will show up again on the screen in a moment. But with the programs, Lisa, that you also offer in the community, we have hour and a half long, or even shorter programs about talking about these 10 warning signs in more detail. And we're excited that you have one coming up here. We're at Lowell Telemedia, and you have one coming up next week.
Next week, yes. I think that's Monday, the 18th. It'll be from 4 to 6 here. And anyone is welcome to come and have an in-depth program on the 10 warning signs and ask questions, and we're really trying to get the word out for that. You can also find so much information on the Alzheimer's Association website with all of this, and find all the different programs that you're doing and so many other people. And I think that the 10 warning signs, it's really so important to recognize those and try to get the diagnosis as early as we can for so many different reasons. But another one that people tend to sometimes have trouble with is, completing familiar tasks.
Sure.
Things that we take for granted, that we just do automatically, that suddenly we can't do anymore. And,
say, what comes to mind for you?
Well,
with
what
that
comes
one?
for mind is actually one of the videos that we show in the 10 warning signs.
Oh, sure.
And this woman who's a PhD,
Okay.
and she shares with us in her video that she used to, things that she used to take for granted, like sending emails. She used to whip them off really quickly.
Yeah.
And then she was starting to take a half an hour to write a simple email, putting those words together. Watching her in the video, you wouldn't think that would be the case, because she's still very articulate. But that was something that she found was really difficult, that she couldn't do anymore with ease.
And I like that you point that out, because it can be subtle, and on first glance or first meeting, it might not be as apparent that something's changing. And so that's why, again, I think these warning signs can be really subtle, can be very individual, but are a really great place to start if you're noticing a change, to talk to your doctor more about it. And I'd love to talk about that a little more, but one of the things I just want to say before we kind of wrap up the warning signs piece, in addition to the community programs, as you mentioned, we have a wealth of information about the 10 warning signs on our website, so you can go on alz.org. We have the 10 warning signs. We have some of the risk factors we talked about a little bit in more detail on there, and we also have free e-learning webinars, so you can watch the 10 warning signs online at your convenience if you don't have the ability to get out to a community program yet. So just feel free to check out our website. Also know that you can call our 24/7 helpline, which we'll talk about a little bit more as well in a few minutes, as a resource to find out what community programs are going on in your area too. So I think those are important resources. If this is giving people a sense of, I'd love to learn more, or this is something I'm noticing, more resources to get more in-depth feedback on things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think, as I'd mentioned, I think a really important piece of why we do this warning signs is educating people, as you said, Lisa, to know what you're looking at, know what to look for, and then to consider talking to a doctor.
Absolutely, and I think that's so important, because the earlier people can get a diagnosis, the more that the important part for me is that I feel like you're more in control of your life and your future at that point, when you're still able to make decisions. You're empowered to be able to say, hey, to my family, this is what I want. And this is how I want it. And these are the people I want involved, and make those decisions while you still can, because I think there might be a myth out there that once you have a diagnosis, you can't make any decisions.
Suddenly lose that ability.
And you don't. Right. It's a very gradual process, and everybody, you can live with this disease from 2 to 20 years. The average is 8 to 10, and everybody's kind of trajectory is a little bit different. but for a long time, you're able to still be able to be in the driver's seat of your own decisions, and so that's part of why that's so important. What other things do you think are reasons that people should get that early diagnosis?
I think it so depends on the person, the family. I think there's a lot of individual reasons, but I think at least one usually resonates with people. I think the point that you made about being involved in and designating a decision maker, and as a follow-up to that, really having conversations about what you want. More than just saying, Lisa, I'd like you to be my healthcare proxy. Also, us having a conversation about what that means. What would I like you to do on my behalf?
Absolutely.
And I think the earlier you know what you're dealing with and what that trajectory might look like, the better able you are to have those more in-depth conversations. And I think that can be really important for families.
And possibly take part in some clinical trials. There's things that might be available to people that you can take advantage of.
And building your support network. I think for a lot of families, recognizing or individuals learning what the diagnosis is can be a relief. Now I know what it is, even though it can be really a big challenge. Having that sense and getting empowered to take action is important.
And it can take a while to get the diagnosis, so you want to start. This has been great.
This is great, Lisa. I'm so glad we started this conversation and shared it with everyone here today. We're really grateful and excited to be bringing more content related to Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Please don't hesitate to call our 24/7 helpline with any questions about the topics we talked about today or anything related to Alzheimer's disease, memory loss, just general information. We're there 24/7, just like the helpline name says. It's 800-272-3900, and we'll be back soon for our dementia discussions, more topics to talk about. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you, Christine.